Europe was supposed to be different. After 2 world wars, the continent rebuilt itself around a powerful idea: that nationalism, once a force of destruction, would be replaced by cooperation, integration, and shared institutions. Borders would soften, economies would merge, politics would become pragmatic, technocratic, and post-ideological. For decades, this vision seemed to work. But today, nationalism is back, and it is reshaping Europe's political landscape in ways few expected. Across the continent, parties built on national identity, sovereignty, and resistance to globalization are no longer confined to the margins. They are winning elections, influencing governments, and redefining what it means to belong. So why is this happening now? Why is nationalism rising again in Europe? The answer lies not in a single crisis, but in a convergence of economic, cultural, political, and psychological forces that have been building for years. To understand the present, we must first understand what nationalism actually is. At its core, nationalism is the belief that the nation, a shared community bound by history, culture, and territory, should be the primary focus of political loyalty. It promises unity, belonging, and control. In times of stability, nationalism can fade into the background. In times of uncertainty, it returns with force. Modern European nationalism differs from its 20th century predecessors. It rarely calls for open conflict. Instead, it frames politics as a struggle between the people and distant elites, between insiders and outsiders, between sovereignty and global forces. This new nationalism is closely linked to populism. It claims to speak for the real people, while portraying political institutions, media, and international organizations as detached or corrupt. It thrives not on ideology alone, but on emotion, especially fear, resentment, and loss. For decades after World War II, European integration dampened these impulses. Economic growth, expanding welfare states, and rising living standards created a sense that the system worked. But that confidence did not last. The first major fracture came with globalization. As Europe integrated into global markets, entire industries disappeared. Manufacturing declined. Secure, long-term jobs were replaced by temporary contracts and service work. While cities and skilled workers often benefited, many regions did not. The financial crisis of 2008 deepened these divides. Governments bailed out banks, while ordinary citizens faced austerity, wage stagnation, and shrinking public services. Trust in institutions collapsed. For many Europeans, the promise of shared prosperity felt broken. Nationalist movements offered a clear narrative. The system had failed because it no longer served the nation. They argued that globalization enriched elites while hollowing out national communities. That Brussels imposed rules without accountability. That governments protected markets more than people. Economic insecurity alone does not create nationalism, but it makes people receptive to it. When life feels unstable, political messages that promise protection, control, and belonging become powerful. Then came migration. The refugee crisis of the mid-2010s did not create nationalism, but it transformed it into a mass political force. Images of uncontrolled borders, overwhelmed institutions, and cultural anxiety spread rapidly, often faster than facts. Even in countries that received relatively few migrants, the perception of crisis mattered more than reality. Nationalist parties framed migration as evidence of elite failure. They linked it to crime, welfare strain, and cultural erosion. But beneath these claims lay a deeper fear, the loss of control over who belongs. For many voters, migration became a symbol, not just of demographic change, but of a world moving too fast, without consent. Nationalism promised to restore boundaries, physical borders, cultural borders, and political borders. Another crucial factor was the collapse of trust. Across Europe, confidence in political parties, parliaments, media, and even democracy itself declined. Many citizens felt that elections changed little, that politicians spoke a different language, and that decisions were made elsewhere. Nationalist leaders exploited this gap. They presented themselves as outsiders, even when they were not. They rejected expertise, attacked institutions, and simplified complex problems into moral struggles between good and evil. This strategy worked especially well in fragmented media environments. Social media amplified anger, rewarded outrage, and allowed nationalist narratives to bypass traditional gatekeepers. But nationalism did not rise automatically. It was built deliberately. Far-right parties adapted their language. They softened their image. They replaced overt extremism with professional branding, disciplined messaging, and policy platforms that mixed nationalism with welfare protection. In France, the National Rally transformed itself from a protest movement into a serious governing contender. By combining anti-immigration rhetoric with promises to defend social benefits, it attracted working-class voters who once supported the left. In Germany, the Alternative for Germany capitalized on migration fears and dissatisfaction with energy and climate policies. Even without entering government, it shifted public debate and forced mainstream parties to respond on its terms. In Austria, the Freedom Party moved from political isolation to electoral victory, demonstrating that nationalist movements can transition from opposition to power. And in countries like Hungary and Poland, nationalism became institutionalized. Once in power, nationalist governments reshaped courts, media, and civil society, not as temporary measures, but as long-term transformations justified in the name of sovereignty. These cases reveal nationalism's most profound impact. It does not merely change who governs, it changes how power is exercised. The consequences extend far beyond national borders. At the European level, rising nationalism weakens collective decision-making. It complicates responses to crises, from migration to security to climate change. It challenges the EU's foundational principles of shared rules and mutual trust. At the domestic level, it risks eroding democratic safeguards. Independent institutions become obstacles. Journalists become enemies. Opposition becomes betrayal. Yet nationalism persists because it answers real questions, even if it offers dangerous solutions. People want security. They want recognition. They want political systems that listen. Ignoring these demands fuels further polarization. But embracing exclusionary nationalism threatens democracy itself. Europe now faces a dilemma. It cannot return to a purely technocratic post-identity politics, nor can it afford to surrender democratic values to fear and resentment. The future of Europe depends on whether it can reconcile national identity with openness, sovereignty with cooperation, and belonging with pluralism. Nationalism is no longer a memory of the past. It is a defining force of the present, and how Europe responds will shape its future for generations to come. Like and subscribe for more history videos.